You're listening to 15 Minutes of Flame with Robert Phoenix.
Well, good morning. Welcome to another edition of 15 Minutes of Flame. What is going on out there in there, people? Robert Phoenix here, broadcasting to you live from Flyover, also known as Fredericksburg, Texas. It is the 23rd of May, 2018. Today's headlines include where do I start? How about I start that life is really, really, really weird. Really weird. I just want to get this. I want to punch this this one thing up here. Hold on. Give me 1 sec. Give me 1 second. Sec. There we go. It's coming. It is coming. It is here. I need this. There it is. There it is. Okay. I just wanted to get this little piece here. All right, let's get into today's show. Today, I'm going to talk about the truth behind mass shootings, and particularly the latest wave of school shootings, which we know has been endless and incessant to the point where it is becoming a real problem. And the problem is, I gotta see chat room action there. Hi, Judy. Good morning to you. There's Maury. Good morning. Good to see you, Maury. My council of 5 is assembling. Here's the problem with the school shootings. The problem with the school shootings is the anxiety that's created in the children in the schools. And it's not just the anxiety, but it's also the butterfly effect of what happens to the kids in the schools that have some, how do I say this? Have some scintilla of truth. And what I mean by that is that if we look at astrologically, which I've talked about before, kids at around 14, 15, and 16, really what they're going through is they're going through that Saturn opposition in their chart. It's the first Saturn opposition. The Saturn opposition will happen at the first time at around 14, 15, 16. And then the next time the Saturn opposition will take place will be 30 years later, around 44, 45. And then the next Saturn opposition will take place at around 74, 75. Those 3 Saturn oppositions are very important in terms of the development of the individual. And it's the development of the individual against the background or the scrim of the dominant culture of the family, the patriarch in the family, and their assigned role or the role that's been assigned to them to some degree by the dominant culture. Now, the dominant culture changes. The dominant culture isn't the same that it was in the 1950s. The dominant culture in the 1950s wasn't the same that it was in the 1900s, and we can go back into time or through time and clearly establish, if we wanted to, and demarcate those differences. I think we can all agree upon that. Now, what the dominant culture actually is and how it manifests, well, that's a whole different thing. What it looks like. So what we have here during that Saturn opposition is it's a kind of a vital time where young people are separating themselves out. They're asking themselves, well, what is true? What is real? Based on whatever's going on in my biology and my epigenetic coding, which does happen. There's genetics and epigenetics. And I would say that both are valid. And I would tilt it probably 60-40 genetics over epigenetics. Don't underestimate epigenetics in terms of altering an individual. So when this occurs, there is almost a split. I mean, I think it's really kind of the first split. The first Saturn square, which happens at 7-8, is an important aspect in the chart because the child goes through its first kind of intense learning curve. And if you look at the example again, I'm going to use education, 20th century, 21st century paradigm, not homeschooling. The first square represents kind of part of the learning curve. Kindergarten it's play, it's fun, it's finger painting and all that stuff. Now it's like, well, guess my sex. Right? That's what's happening in kindergarten now. Guess what, little boys and little girls? You may not actually be a boy or a girl. Isn't that exciting? If you're a boy, there are certain things that you can do that you probably didn't think you could do. Oh, isn't that fun? Isn't that liberating? If you're a boy, if you wanted to, guess what? You could wear a dress. And if you're a girl, well, if we allowed boys to play with cap guns, you could play with a cap gun. You could run around shooting Indians. Who's the new Indians, by the way? New Indians is terrorists, right? Terrorists. If cap guns were a really big deal now, remember when you were a kid, you played cowboys and Indians? I did. Sometimes I was a cowboy and sometimes I was an Indian. That's just how it rolled, right? That's just how it rolled. Could you imagine kids now playing soldiers and Al-Qaeda? I'll be Al-Qaeda. I'll be the soldier. Can you imagine that? All of a sudden, it's like, where's Josh? Where's Joshua? I don't know. Next thing you know, one of the other kids has snatched Joshua and he's torturing him. Right? He's torturing him to find out where the army or where the soldiers are hiding their munitions. Times have changed, haven't they? So it's that first Saturn square, though, is when you get into school, things get difficult. You have to learn about things like math and English. It challenges, 7, 8, especially like second grade, third grade. You're into that first Saturn square. You're into those first couple of years of assimilation, dealing with kids, dealing with different personality types, dealing with teachers with the Saturn square. Some kids have their first challenge and issue around authority with a Saturn square, because Saturn's authority, right? Challenge with authority. The school system, by the way, is the third house. The third house in the school system is run by Gemini, ruled by Gemini. And in that position, polarity and duality begins to take shape. Very simple. You go to school, you do something wrong. Well, guess what? You're a bad boy or a bad girl. Now, this is different than when it takes place at home. Because when it takes place at home, you're dealing with the authority of the parent, which is very different than the authority of the school. And the authority of the parents is vested in and given consent to the authority of the teacher and the authority of the school, which isn't necessarily a great thing, by the way. People were asking me about after yesterday's show, well, what should we do? What should we do? What should we do? And I'm thinking, well, you should homeschool your kids. Homeschool your kids or get them into some, private school that's going to, be more akin to whatever it is you want your child to learn, or just even the security or privacy protocols of a private school. They're going to be different. That's just the way it is. You want to get out of Common Core, get into a private school. Private schools don't take public money. In very few instances. Some might, but generally they don't. If they do take it, it'll be connected to, perhaps some kind of church, mega church, and they may have some chutes and ladders that allows them to get public money through being a nonprofit or running through the church. But still, by and large, if you want out of Common Core, get your kids into a private school. Even if the private school has some kind of religious training, which may not actually be bad in some instances. But now, if you don't want to pull your kids out of school, well, Obama will help you pull them out, because he says that because of the school shootings now, kids should stay home. Oh, here we go. We're going to use the kids. Thank God summer's coming. That's all I can say. Thank God the summer's coming. We're going to talk more about this. We're going to talk about what's going on with mass shootings. And the schools are part of it, but not the only part of it. Of course, Las Vegas was a mass shooting. Did not take place in a school. What happened in Sweetwater, Texas, or Spring, Texas, rather. Was never Sweetwater, not Spring. That didn't take place in a school. It took place in a church. The shooting in South Carolina, that took place in a church. So it's mass shootings with the schools being kind of at the center of it right now. So we talked about this first Saturn Square, and then the second Saturn movement is the opening. It's to separate away from authority. And in that moment, there is a split. There is a split between the individual and the patriarch, the family, the culture, society at large. And through that split, this is when the information gets poured in. Every time there is a split in the individual, the information gets poured in. Now, I'm not saying that people who are running these programs know this tacitly, although I do think that they have some understanding and have been proceeding accordingly, because ever since the 1950s, the 1950s are a pretty important time in the development of what we call youth culture. Before the 1950s, youth culture might have been served to some extent in media and in Hollywood by movies, shorts, and reels featuring groups like the Bowery Boys. Some of you who are old enough to remember the Bowery Boys, I used to watch the Bowery Boys every single Sunday morning when I was young, because they would run the Bowery Boys. When I was a kid, Sunday mornings consisted of Ma and Pa Kettle, the Bowery Boys, and either Francis the Mule, Mr. Ed. That was the programming on Sunday morning. It was cheap. It wasn't a cartoon. So I would watch the Bowery Boys. And the Bowery Boys, Leo Gorcey, Hans Hall, et cetera, were these rough and tumble youth who lived in the Bowery in New York. And they were edgy, and they didn't like authority, but they ultimately pooled their resources and pooled their energy to be, at the end of the episode, good guys. And there's some, I think Humphrey Bogart makes an appearance in one of the Bowery Boys movies, and there are a lot of famous actors. I think, I'm trying to think, is Spencer Tracy? I don't think so. Anyway, the Bowery Boys are fascinating because they're the first kind of appearance of this youth culture, this teen culture in Hollywood and in the media. And basically saying, hey, look, there are these rough and tumble young guys. They have a lot of energy. They don't do things traditionally, but at the end of the day, they're okay. And they wind up helping solve a crime. Now, that may be another form of programming where it's like, hey, you got all this energy. but we know that you really love the police, and you'll side with the police versus against the police. I don't know. I'm not going to get that deep, although it's in there. But that was the first time we actually saw this kind of in popular culture, this teen representation of rebellion and I don't want to say disorder, but to some degree, social chaos. They all came from kind of rough backgrounds, and they weren't privileged by any stretch. It was a theme that spoke to the common man. Now, whether or not it had any redeeming social value, again, I'm not here to make a judgment around. I'm just sharing with you the context, historical context. Then we fast forward that, and we get into the 50s, and the 50s are very interesting because this is when teen culture really explodes, and they all know what's going on. The baby boomers are starting to have kids, and the kids are going to be the first wave. Okay, so let's look at like the first wave of the baby boomers. The first wave of the baby boomers are going to be born right around 1945, roughly, right around 1945. 46 is kind of the outlier. 45. So if we fast forward, we go from 1945 to 1955. What do we have? We have kids that are, again, they're in that Saturn square, getting ready for that Saturn opposition, which is going to take place for them. Let's see. So it would be 4 years later, be 1959. In 1959, we're really seeing sort of the birth of mass media and rock and roll. And 1960 heralds a massive change in terms of consciousness around the youth. So in the late 50s, really we see this explosion of rock and roll that takes place. And it takes place specifically for a reason. And the reason is to grab the attention of youth culture. They know that the demographics of all these soldiers coming home, having tons of kids, they're going to be really powerful in terms of being able to steer their ideas, steer their consciousness, steer their mind, and get into their pocketbooks. And Edward Bernays was considered the high priest of marketing, advertising, public relations, and programming. And Bernays knew exactly what was going on and the power of the media to shape and control our minds and consciousness. And so what we have in the 1950s is the spirit of rebellion. And remember, a lot of these kids are born with Pluto in Leo. In fact, almost all of them are. The opposite sign of Leo is Aquarius. And that's the back door. The opposite sign is always the back door to the sign that we're talking about. So the back door to Leo, which is going to be being popular, being accepted, being seen as the man on campus or the girl on campus or the golden child or all these kinds of leonine aspects. The back door is Aquarius, which is going to be rebellion, setting yourself apart from the rest of society and culture. And that took place with the baby boomers, and that was the first generation that rebels en masse. Now, it's that 14, 15-year-old period. If we look back, it's going to be around 1959. That's when the information gets poured in, right? They know this. And there are biological aspects that take place right around 14 and 15 as well. Of course, we're talking about the rush and the flush of testosterone and estrogen, which creates a state of confusion in the body, right? The body goes through a bit of a trauma space when that happens. And so it's important to be able to get into their minds and their psyches. This is what happens. Okay, so just knowing that, and it's a long way to get there. When we see our kids who are around 14, 15, 16 years old, what's happened is that these events now are getting poured into their brains. So what do we have? We're having a generation now that is being traumatized on a consistent basis. Think of like not one 9/11, but many 9/11s. So then what happens with the kids is that they have parents. In most cases, they have parents, some of which are the biological parents, some of which are a mix and match kind of version, biological, and the other parent comes along for the ride, right? And so those parents, one of those parents is going to be biological. In most cases, I'd say it's probably the mother. And then what happens is that the mother will then take in the trauma, which is what a good mother will do. They'll look at their child and they'll say, well, this is going on right now, and this is terrible. This sucks. My kid is traumatized. I can see them. They're having a hard time sleeping at night. They're wondering if their school is going to be next. And this is, to me, this is a crime against humanity. And what's happening, not to the kids in the school that are theoretically, I'm going to put quotes here, because I have a view of the shootings, which I'm going to go over and go through, and some of which some of you may not like it, and that's okay. But it's my view of the shootings. So what they want to do is they want to make sure that their kids are safe. This is a normal and natural function of being a parent, especially being a mother. So what do you do after that? Well, it's like, my kid is stressed out, traumatized, can't sleep at night, is afraid to go to school. And I'm telling you right now, there are kids out there that are having that issue, thanks to what's going on. And here is Barack Obama, the Pied Piper, basically saying, keep your kids at home until they change the gun laws. Yeah, that's out there. That's absolutely out there. I would say keeping your kids at home is fine. I would say it's fine. I would say keep your kids at home, homeschool your kids. Get together with groups of parents that want to do the same thing. I remember when I lived in Berkeley, I used to take my son to a park in Berkeley. It's the Aqueduct Park in Berkeley. It was one of my favorite parks. It's right by the freeway, but it was an interesting park because it was kind of rolling and green. It was a little sketchy. Like every now and then you'd come across kind of a sketch set up there, with people, doing things in the grottos, whatever they were doing. Every now and then it'd be a little sketch. But we encountered this group of parents, mothers mostly. There was one guy one time. And there were about 3 or 4 of them, the parents. And then there's a group of these kids. We encountered them. And they were basically group schooling, homeschooling their kids. And that was part of their outing. And I talked to them, and I got it. I was like, wow, this is really interesting. I like what these people are doing. It wasn't just one family. It was a group, and they were able to. The kids seemed happy and fun and playful. So it's not just, you don't have to do it on your own, obviously. And I'm not breaking any new ground here, but I'm just sharing with you. If you want to keep your kids home, keep them home, homeschool them. So now we have Barack Obama, and this leads us to the next point of where we're going with all of this, and what I would call the truth behind mass shootings. Okay. First of all, let me typify what I believe is and has been happening since 9/11. 9/11 plus. I'm going to focus mostly on the schools, what's happened in the schools, but not solely with the schools. I don't believe that the mass shootings are one specific creature or animal. I believe that there are times when the mass shootings are fake, or shootings that are fake. The one that happened in Roanoke, Virginia, with the reporter and the camera guy, I'm sorry, that thing did not take place. I mean, it did, but it didn't take place in the same way that we thought it took place. All those people were assets, and they got moved around, and they say, "Well, I went to their funeral." I don't care if you went to their funeral. There are funerals that happen, that where the deaths are not real. They're not real. These things happen. I'm sorry, they happen. You think every funeral in the history of the planet Earth has a corresponding dead body to go along with it. This doesn't happen. They could have the funeral. They could burn the body. Like Scalia, right? They wasted no time with that. They torched Scalia, even though he's a Catholic, and you're not supposed to be incinerated if you're a Catholic. It's against the church. So there are two things there. Was Scalia a true Catholic? Yeah. That's an interesting question, isn't it? So there are events, the shootings, they're not real. They're staged. They're staged. There are events that are hybrid events. They're staged and they're real. There are events that are real. And they all are mixed together. Sometimes the shooter is a Manchurian Candidate style shooter where they've been programmed and traumatized and then triggered. Sometimes they're an asset. Sometimes they don't exist. Sometimes they're one person and they're actually another person. It all depends. I don't think there's one size fits all model to any of this. Keep that in mind. If you think you have it nailed down, you don't have it nailed down. Because there are going to be times where people are going to lose their lives. There are going to be times when nobody's going to lose their life. There are going to be times when people will lose their life and not lose their life. I mean, this is the way, this is how it works. You go back to 9/11. Were people actually on those planes? Were there actual planes? And if there are people who were part of the flight manifest, where did they go? They weren't there. Clearly nothing happened in Pennsylvania. If you look at the specs and the forensics for the Pentagon, a plane that size would have left a much bigger hole. There was hardly any debris. In order for the plane to hit at that level, it would have had to have flown parallel to the earth at about 20 feet high for roughly, about an eighth of a mile or something like that. You tell me how somebody who had absolutely zero flight training, like maybe one guy in that crew, Muhammad Atta, who could actually theoretically fly a plane, but not be able to fly a plane the way that was required to like nail the Pentagon. You think those clowns could have handled it? No. The only way they could have handled it is if the planes were taken over by some form of remote control, which is possible. They have the technology to do that. We all know that. What is it, Operation Skyhawk or Project Skyhawk? But that kind of trajectory, that kind of, flying at a parallel angle for a period of time so it could actually hit directly into the wall of the Pentagon is clearly more akin to a projectile versus an actual plane. So then that leaves us with the two planes that were rogue, right, and went to New York City. And then, of course, we get into the pulling of Building 7, and then the whole thing begins to come apart. Anyway, show's not about 9/11, but that's the template. And then we move forward, and now we're dealing with this Melange. Like, who is this Demetrios kid? What's his background? We don't know anything about him. He's wearing the coat with all the various symbols. More confusion. The Iron Cross, which isn't a Nazi symbol apparently, but a symbol of courage. Okay. How do we define it? We define it as German. It's a German symbol for people that are looking for, the connection with the symbolic import. Most people will say, well, that looks pretty German to me. And then, of course, there's the hammer and the sickle. And then we have the heart with the LGBT thing on his cap and Cthulhu. And then we have the Star of Texas. I mean, the whole thing is just this melange. It's like, what else could they have put in there? How about a Boy Scout pin? Maybe that. How about a Boy Scout pin and or my favorite pony pin? There we go. That would have just thrown everybody into a freaking tizzy, right? So now we've got these events. And I want to go back to Parkland because I think Parkland is an important stop along the demoralization tour here. Parkland stands out for a number of reasons. The first reason it stands out because of the day it happened on, which is Valentine's Day. Everybody thinks of Valentine's Day as being hearts and love, and then you have this crushing event that takes place in this school in Texas. I'm sorry, Florida. And everything that comes out of Parkland, and you know the story, the Parkland Six and David Hogg and Never Again and the March on Washington, the CNN town hall meeting, which all seems like, baked and ready to go. It's like off the shelf, baked and ready to go. So when we look at Parkland, it's a very interesting confluence of actors and participants. So on the one hand, you have Scott Israel, who's the sheriff. He's the Broward County sheriff. And Scott Israel has a sketchy past. He was accused of a number of different things. One of the things that he was accused of was cheating on his wife with a minor. You saw the video. Some of you saw the video. And it got absolutely zero play on national TV. And Scott Israel had his guys stand down. And then there's all the crazy video that goes along. I mean, there's just so much there with Scott Israel alone. Scott Israel belongs to Chabad Lubavitch. Chabad Lubavitch happens to be an organization that's very close to the Trump administration, which we've talked about. Chabad Lubavitch is one of the cornerstones of the life of the Kushners, Jared and Ivanka. So we see the same organization that Scott Israel is a part of in Broward, Florida, or Broward County, Florida, and the same organization and group is the same organization and group, that's completely tight and pretty much in lockstep with Jared Kushner, who is the silent arm of the U.S. presidency. And I've talked about this before with Kushner, who, by the way, is in trouble. He can't make the payments on his building. His beloved 666 Fifth Avenue building is in arrears. The slumlords can't even make the payments on their own building. So they're going to, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Qataris, and the Qataris are to bail them out to the tune of about $1.5 billion. So when you get bailed out, like what are the Qataris going to do with that building? Are they going to rent out office space in the prestigious 666 Fifth Avenue by renting out the office space? The reason why they're behind in the payments is because they don't have enough tenants to get in there and help them continue to have that esoteric marvel that they've purchased. So if it's not working for the Kushners, they're not making any money off the building. You think the Qataris are going to have the magic touch? Well, they'll probably set up some offices there. They'll probably get some office space, some real estate space, and who knows what they'll do with it. But at the end of the day, when you take money, you're beholden to the person you take the money from. And this particular group they've got a history of bailing people out and loaning people money. That's another story altogether. But what I'm trying to share with you is that there's the same relationship that Scott Israel has with this group in Florida, Jared Kushner has in his life, and they're all very engaged with this idea, this insane idea of, the waiting for the Moshiach or the Messiah, and when the Messiah comes, there's going to be this cleansing of the planet. I mean, it's as nuts as the Christians in their rapture reverie. It's like, I mean, these people are death cults. They're death cults. Okay, so let's look at this now. So now we have this connection with Scott Israel. What about Roger Stone? I've talked about this before. Roger Stone actually lives down there. He's one of Trump's best pals. He's known Roger Stone for a very long time. Roger Stone's son is on the Broward County Sheriff's Department. How about that? Just keep that in mind. Roger Stone is like a total Hermes character. He's able to move between worlds, whether the world happens to be Republican or Democrat. It really doesn't matter to Roger Stone. I mean, he would like to say that he's a Republican or a Goldwater Republican or whatever. But Roger Stone will work for anybody. As long as they pay him, he'll work for anybody. And Scott Israel is a buddy of his. He helped Scott Israel get elected and then reelected in Florida. Okay, so now we have the Roger Stone component. But what about Debbie Wasserman Schultz? Well, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, that's her district. That's the district she represents. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz did not have a great 2017. And she didn't have a great 2016 either. In 2016, it was found and determined that she was involved in hijacking the DNC for Hillary Clinton, and all of you Bernie Sanders fans out there are probably very familiar with what Debbie Wasserman Schultz was doing with your votes and what was happening in terms of the primaries. If you ever have time, just go back and watch that primary in Nevada, where everybody wanted Sanders, and basically the delegates completely hijacked that primary, and they said, "Screw you, we're nominating Hillary." That's what was happening. And when Debbie Wasserman Schultz got caught red-handed doing all this stuff and taking the money, appropriating the money and sticking it over to the Clinton campaign, she went to the Clinton campaign. I mean, this is what they do. They just go from here to there, and it's like, hey, no problem. I'll get out of here. I know. I didn't do as good a job as I can. And really what I wanted to do was just, believe in Hillary and work for Hillary. So I'm just going to go over here and take care of that. And that's what happened. That is what happened. And I think both sides don't have enough outrage left inside their bellies to make much of a difference at times. Because if I was a Democrat, I would have just screamed bloody murder. Holy hell. That's what I would have done. Until Debbie Wasserman Schultz had nothing to do with that campaign at all, period, in the story. I don't know if you have any legal recourse. Hillary's going to get the nomination no matter what. No matter what. And if you Bernie Sanders people really want a Bernie Sanders, then you need to look to Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders had actually declared as an independent. I bet Bernie Sanders might have actually become president of the United States. He had that much support. Grandpa Bernie, right? Man of the people. Donald Trump, man of the people, even though Donald Trump is an elite. And Bernie Sanders is an elite too. He's a communist socialist elite. Bernie's never worked a day in his life. He doesn't know what it's like to do hard labor, sweat his ass off. He doesn't know what it's like to get into a restaurant and have to take orders from people, have people be snide and rude and boss you around. He doesn't know anything about that. He doesn't know what it's like to get into a truck, like a soda truck or a water truck, and haul that stuff around on 95-degree days, sometimes up 2-3 flights of stairs, and do it because you've got to do that stuff quickly. You can't mess around. You can't lollygag. You've got to complete your route in a day, and they pack those routes. He doesn't know anything about that. Nothing, none whatsoever. He doesn't know what it's like to have to watch after and care after somebody else's children. Be responsible for the health and the well-being of those children, and the pressure and the responsibility that implies. He knows nothing about this. He's never rode shotgun in a garbage truck and got up at 3 o'clock in the morning in order to do that, in order to have that privilege and have that job. He doesn't know anything about that at all. He doesn't know what it's like to get into a coal mine and really be at risk for the mine collapsing and all the physical maladies that go along with the mine. And yet he's the man of the people. Trump's the same way. Trump didn't really work a day in his life. I mean, he did, but again, we're talking silver spoon, privileged, And maybe, just maybe, hanging out with some of the guys on the construction crew and all that stuff might have given him a sense of what it's like to be around the people. Obama was not a man of the people. Are you kidding me? Obama was raised as an elite at every single step of his life. From the Punahou Academy to his fake time in California, what was it, at Occidental or Chapman? I forget this college in California, to his fake time in Columbia. Everything's made up. Everything was programmed. He was given theoretically the best education along the way, but nobody ever really remembers him. Of course, when he goes to law school, he's got some track record there. He's on the law review, but does he really do anything with it? No. He never writes a single article. He's the editor. He's just magically named the editor. None of these people are men of the people. George Bush, man of the people, bullshit. Again, elite, spoon-fed, silver spoon-fed. Never really had to work a day in his life. And that's truth. You think being governor is work? Not really. Speaking of governor, I'm sort of diverging here a little bit. Speaking of governor, this is what I wanted to bring up today. So Texas now is ready. They're ready. Texas is locked and loaded for the gubernatorial race. Of course, the incumbent is Greg Abbott, who's a wheelchair-bound Zionist. And then we have Lupe Valdez, the first openly gay Latina to run for a gubernatorial seat. And the Texas gubernatorial race is like, it's typical of where we are today. So you look at Greg Abbott, he's like, okay. You look at him, you go, okay, well, First of all, we know it, basically, if you're a Texan, let's go into the Texan mindset. Okay, we know he's straight, right? He's straight, right? Greg Abbott's straight. He's not gay. Oh, he's white too. He's white. He used to be able to walk. He can't walk anymore. But we're not going to hold that against him. He's like Greg Abbott's like the Professor X of governors. So you look at him and you go, okay, I'm going to sign off on Greg Abbott. But somewhere in the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, geez, didn't he like make those people down in Galveston or Corpus? Didn't he make them like sign a pledge of allegiance to Israel so that they can get their hurricane money? You in the back of your mind think, yeah, that he did that. That's I'm not sure how I feel about that. But now you've got Lupe Sanchez. Right? And you look at her, you're a Texan, do you really want to vote for this woman? To have her become governor of the states? Well, Greg Abbott looks pretty good at that point, even though he's a not so closeted Zionist. You just look at me, wow, gee, I'll vote for Abbott. I mean, even that went into my head. Well, theoretically, there should be more than one candidate, right? What if somebody came along and said, I'm not Greg Abbott, I'm not Lupe Sanchez, and vote for me? Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. That's kind of how the game works, right? Again, it's this split, the bicameral split, and the compartmentalization forcing you to take one choice to the other. And it's very extreme. It's like so extreme in some ways. I mean, I suppose Greg Abbott could be more extreme. I don't know. Maybe he could walk. Maybe he could roll around in a Nazi helmet, and that he could really be extreme. Or he could put the swastika, on the side of his wheelchair and be extreme. Anyway, let's get back to the school shooting stuff, because now you have Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is a Democrat. Liberal, progressive. That's her district. And what is Debbie Wasserman Schultz, besides being accused of hijacking the primary, what happened to her in 2017? Well, it was the Awan affair. Imran Awan, right? Imran Awan. So she's connected to the Awans, and the Awans basically got into 3/4 of the House. It's the Democratic IT scandal. So the Awans, most of you know this. Debbie Wasserman Schultz promoted the Iwans inside of the house, basically they're great guys, they're really smart, they can take care of your computer, your IT stuff, and the Iwans didn't know shit about IT. They had no knowledge. They had to hire some 17-year-old kid who begrudgingly did the work to do the basic fixes and updates. Meanwhile, the Iwans were, cloning and copying everything on these laptops when they'd be brought in. And I'm almost certain that they probably put some spyware inside the laptops as well. So Debbie Wasserman Schultz didn't just recommend the Iwan. She had an ongoing relationship with Imran Iwan. They were lovers. She protected them fiercely because they were doing stuff with that information. Where do you think that information was going? Well, take a good guess. So here we have this person who's corrupt to the core from the Democratic National Convention, getting kicked out of being the head of the DNC, moving over to the Hillary campaign, and she's involved in this laptop scandal in Washington, D.C., and none of it's ever being resolved. None of it. Absolutely none of it. And so what's happening is we're dealing with the school shootings, at least at an emotional level, but nobody's looking at Debbie Wasserman Schultz anymore. Nobody's really talking about it. It's getting buried and buried and buried and buried and buried, and nothing will ever happen to her. Nothing. So now you look at the players involved, and you see that there's Schultz, theoretically left Democrat progressive, code for social Marxist. And then on the right, you've got people like, again, embedded in Broward County through the Sun, connections with Scott Israel, Chabad Lubavitch, Trump, Kushner. You've got the Republican side, or the so-called conservative side, and it's all tangled in a knot in Parkland. It's all tangled together in a knot in Parkland. Now, let's take this one step further. Okay, let's just say, for instance, that my supposition is mostly true about the shootings, and not just, again, the schools, but in other places. And we have this so-called very sophisticated network of intelligence, from the CIA to the NSA to the FBI, with massive amounts of computing power and informants and the whole nine yards. Don't you think that these agencies know what's going on? Don't you think that they have some real insight as to what happened? Look at Las Vegas. The FBI basically killed everything around Las Vegas. You had the police chief of police there speaking out, and what happened? Well, he got shut down and shut up real quickly, didn't he? So they're sitting on tranches of information. They have the best analysts, highly paid analysts, highly paid analysts to look at this stuff, to go in and look at, well, geez, what happened? Well, that video in Parkland was on a 20-second delay. And oh, by the way, they're running that thing through YouTube, private YouTube channel. It's like, what the hell is going on here? You don't think that they have analysts inside of these agencies that have been doing this work for decades, who are sharp as a tack and know information systems, and they have young people, young kids, hardcore, code monkeys that can get in? They have all these resources at their disposal. They know what's happening. They know what's happening, and they know what's going on. Do you think Trump doesn't know what's going on? Of course he knows what's going on. Of course he does. He's connected into and nested with a group that is, for all intents and purposes, an intelligence gathering agency that is not part of the government. So they know all this stuff. And if you don't think that he does, then number one, you're either naive, or Trump is even more naive than you, and that's a problem. Okay, so if that's the case, and they actually know what's going on, and they can see that there is a quote-unquote plan, because the same thing, okay, let's just look at this now. The same apparatus and the same kinds of events actually helped get Trump elected. Like the Kate Steinle thing. I've got weird feelings about the Kate Steinle thing. I really do. The Kate Steinle thing was almost like the day, when David Hogg said, "Oh, tomorrow somewhere in America, some kid is going to wake up and it's going to be his last day." And I got a really bad feeling about this, a really bad feeling. And then, boom, what happens the next day? It's like Trump coming out and talking about what's going on with the borders and what's going on with these monsters and these criminals. And then 2 days later or 3 days later, whatever, Kate Steinle, boom. And Trump would talk about some kind of event that was connected to Muslims and Islam. And then what would happen? We'd have a what? Event. Do you think those things were somehow coincidental, that Trump was just such a mage of the air, that he could pull them out of the air just like that and be so prescient and then it would happen? No, those things happened because they were programmed. The Kate Steinle thing is weird. There's a lot of weirdness about it, I have to say. I have to say the whole thing, from the guy finding the gun. I mean, there's just so much high strange. And it's one of those things that has been really pulled apart, because if you're on the right, do you really want to pull that apart? No, because that screws with your narrative. Totally screws with your narrative. And the left, do you want to pull that apart? Well, maybe, but it screws with your narrative too, because it means that you've been hoodwinked. And if you're on the left, do you really want to be hoodwinked and made to look like a fool? There's a reason why that guy got off the way that he did. I'm just saying. Okay, so it's the same apparatus that's been at work. It's worked for both sides. We have these events and they further agendas. And those events help further Trump's agenda. It helped get him elected. It showed him to be a prescient pope of the populist precinct. A prescient pope of the populist posse. PPP. And now we've got it happening on the school side and the mass shooting side. They know what's going on. They know exactly what's going on. And meanwhile, the crimes and not just the misdemeanors, but the felonies of our elected officials go, they go unprosecuted. There's no resolution. I love how, this brings us back to the QAnon side of things. And again, my opinion on QAnon is I do believe that Trump is involved with QAnon. I also believe that QAnon's a limited hang. I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. Because that's where they get us, right? That's where they get us. Well, it's a limited hang. Well, see all these things, how they came true? Well, it's just like the same process that's happened with the election. It's the same process. It's the same process where Trump appeared to be prescient. And he would talk about something and something would happen. It's not necessarily because Trump has time travel at his disposal and he went to the future and saw these events and came back and was able to talk about them. No, it's because he's part of a program that coordinates these events. And they've been coordinating them very quickly, lightning speed. It's the same thing with QAnon. So we had this thing where, oh my God, Weeder's laptop got cracked open. It was a big deal in Jordan Sather. What happened? It was an event, but what happened? Oh, you can't rush it. Don't rush. They've had that damn laptop now, since Anthony Weiner got arrested. That's how long they've had that laptop with the folder, quote unquote, insurance. So they have this thing. It's like, okay, we're gonna announce that the laptop had that it's been, I don't know, opened up, subpoenaed, and it's like everybody's sitting around rubbing their hands. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here it comes. Come on now, let them have it. It's like Popeye. It's like that Popeye. Remember Popeye? His arm would spin like a clock really quickly. And he'd give Brutus an uppercut. Wham! Right. We've been in the wind-up mode now with Popeye's arm for about 2 years. When is it going to start connecting with some jaws? And I'm not talking the jaws of the people. I'm talking about the right jaws, right? It's not going to happen. Not like that. Okay. So if they know what's happening, and they do, they know what's going on. They know who the players are. They got plenty of intel. Trust me. Even if it's the so-called other side, just look at Broward County. That's the model. There is no other side. There is no other side. They're all working together. Don't you get it through your head? They're working together. Now, did Trump have a road to Damascus moment? Yeah, I think he did. I think somewhere in Trump's head, it's kind of like the same thing that happened with the Shah, or the same thing that happened with Noriega, or the same thing that happened with Omar Torrijos. These guys will get in and they'll say, it's like, okay, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go finally redeem my life. And I'm going to stand up and work for the people. And all of a sudden it's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. It was great. You had a moment of conscience, right? You had a moment with Jesus. You had a moment of clarity. It was a nice moment. I'll come back to reality. Here's really what's going to happen. And here's really what you're responsible for. Okay? So if that's the case, and they know what's going on, and I do believe they do. I think they have so much information. It's incredible. It's incredible. Then why are they letting these things happen? Why aren't they stopping them in their tracks? If Trump is so almighty and powerful and has the military on his side, he was put in place by the military, according to Alex Jones, why do they not stop it? If they see that there's going to be social unrest and our kids are at risk, whether it's real or not, and I'm assuming that some of these cases are actually real and they're putting their kids at risk and they have the intel and all the stuff, then why aren't they stopping it? And you as a parent should really ask yourself that question. And I seriously doubt, though, if you're that kind of a parent, you're going to be listening to my show anyway. Maybe you are. So it's not the Second Amendment and the gun makers and the NRA. And by the way, Oliver North is in charge of the NRA now. And I guarantee you, Oliver North is going to sabotage the NRA because he's a born traitor. We saw what happened with Iran-Contra. He lied. Oliver North lied. Theoretically, he was under some umbrella of patriotism. No, he's a born traitor. Now he's running the NRA. Do the math. So the whole piece here is that they actually want to take guns away. Again, let me just break it down. I had to get here through this kind of labyrinth. But if you're the police, do you want civilians to have guns? No, of course not. That makes your job more difficult, doesn't it? It makes your job more difficult. Although you want some guns, and trust me, if they took the guns away, there'd be enough illicit guns so that, police will still need to be employed, theoretically, because if there's no guns, then what are the police going to be protecting us against? And there are lots of policemen. There's a police union, generates tons of money. Car manufacturers, supply cop cars and weapons and communication systems. I mean, it's an industry, right? So even if the guns are taken away, they're still going to be there because there'll still be an implied threat or there'll still be the smattering of guns. But by and large, they want the upper hand. They go into any situation, they want the upper hand. So they're okay with guns being gone, just not so much so that they become obsolete. And what about the Army? Does the Army not want guns in the hands of the American public? Well, if the Army at some point has to turn against the American public, and I'm not saying that it will or it won't, but let's say it does, at a high level, do you want Americans to have guns? The answer would be no. Or let's say it's not even the American Army. Let's say it's a different kind of army. Let's say it's an army from another country. Or let's say, it's a corporate army, which I think you'll probably see more of in the future. In some ways, we're probably already seeing that. I'm talking about a mass level. Do you want the American people to have guns? The answer is no, clearly. So if the Army doesn't want the American people to have guns, police doesn't really want the American people to have guns, although they want the threat of guns or some sort of violence because they need to be able to continue their presence. uh, then don't you think that at some point they would be fine with having the Constitution changed or amended? I think they would. It's in their best interest. Now, is it in the best interest of the prison industrial complex to have people without guns? No, because it has a steady supply of cheap labor. Now, that could change. If we get into debtor's prison mode, you won't need a gun. You'll just need a debt. I'm sorry, I'm a little dark today. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this. So the truth behind the mass shootings is that, number one, there are people in high places and in middle high places, both from a governmental side and from an intelligence side, that know exactly what's going on. And Broward is the perfect case of collusion at a high level. At a high level. They know what's going on. And then moving that forward, then, of course, if that's the case, then why would they continue to let these things happen? Because it moves an agenda. And it happens on the left and it happens on the right. We saw it happen with Trump in the run-up to the election. And we're seeing it now on the left. It's going back and forth and back and forth. And that brings us to Anthony Sutton all over again. In the Hegelian dialectic, skull and bones, the left and the right are basically giving each other back rubs. Okay? That's what they're doing. So the shootings will continue until something is broken. And this comes right out of the Cloward-Piven strategy. The Cloward-Piven strategy with coming out of the, what is it, what was his name, Paul Cloward and Francis Fox Piven. I need to get my Cloward-Piven straight. We aim. Richard Cloward, my bad. Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven. Yep, they were professors at Columbia University. Same school that theoretically Barack Obama went to. And they developed the Cloward-Piven strategy, which basically used the welfare system against itself, and they bankrupted. They bankrupted New York City. New York State, if I'm not mistaken, right? New York State. They bankrupted the state because of the heavy burden on the welfare system, overtaxing the police. There was a lot of kind of, insurrection and synthetic protests. They had a guy by the name of George Wiley who was a shit disturber, and he went into the black community and helped organize the black community and made them very difficult to deal with during that time. So the cops would have to go out and overtime and have to deal with, whatever happened with the violence and cleaning up. And it was just a mess. New York City was a mess. And these people were basically orchestrating the mess. You had garbage strikes. It was terrible. So they broke the state and they said, okay, we'll use the system against itself. So what we're seeing here with both the Second and the First Amendment is the system being used against itself. The Second Amendment will be challenged and challenged and challenged and challenged and challenged until ultimately it's broken. Same with the First Amendment, with the adoption of hate speech laws. I don't know if you've noticed this, but almost every single provider, whether it's my email provider, whether it's Spreaker or Google or YouTube, there are new terms and conditions that you have to agree to. There's a reason for that, and it's across the board. And the hate speech stuff. Now, if you don't agree with them, you don't get to use the service. So you don't get to challenge this. This is a problem. Really what should happen is people, the problem with Spreaker is that they're located, their offices, they have offices here in the United States, but they're based out of Italy. So you're dealing with an Italian company, international law, But if somebody was, had money and deep pockets, here's what I think needs to happen. Somebody needs to go after one of these entities and file a class action suit based on the First Amendment and break these agreements that we're having to sign now. They're happening all simultaneously very, very quickly because you'll be shut down or shut out. And then what will happen is if you have a record of doing these kinds of violation of agreements, you won't be allowed to use the service. They'll be flagged. This is where it's all headed. So the First Amendment and the Second Amendment will be used against us until both of those amendments are broken. So you'll see clowns that'll be involved in hate speech and the Richard Spencers of the world and all the paid opposition, and they'll make everything worse for the rest of us who are just trying to untangle and to untie some of these knots. So with that in mind, again, understand what's going on here. There's a lot more than meets the eye. And this brings us into the whole QAnon piece, and that it's not that simple. It's not like, all of a sudden these people are the white knights are going to show up. The white hats are going to show up and save the day. Because if that's the case, then they would have been involved with a lot of this stuff already. And who knows? I don't know. Maybe they've stopped any number of events. I don't know. I don't know. I can't. My ability to be prescient can only go so far. Let's get into the chat room. Let's see what's happening with the chatters, the Council of Five. Let's see. Steve says, DWS is catching up to HRC and people not living long in her proximity. Maury, Russia, ? Laugh out loud. No salvation from without, period. Steve and Chris, yes. Bingo, Sophia, yep, just had to accept it on Spreaker this morning. See? And Yahoo mailed this morning. That's right. The new terms and conditions, the TOC, the T&Cs, they're coming. And those T&Cs are going to be in place. Somebody needs to challenge the T&Cs with a class action suit based on the First Amendment and the right to freedom of speech. I don't have the money. But if this is where Judicial Watch and some of these well-heeled and well-funded people who have the money to hire a lawyer and actually create a class action suit should get right involved and crack it open. Let's see what else we have here. Late 50s, Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Wayne Eddy. That's right. Brett James Dean, Rebel Dot. It was all part of the program, Maury. It was all part of the program. It looks to me more like kids today are locked into their safe spaces and playing with electronic media more than anything. That's true, but I'm going to tell you, where I live out here, there are these kids that play on the lawn. I live in an apartment complex in Fredericksburg. I'm not too proud to say that. And they play out here on the lawn. They play ball. They do all kinds of fun stuff. I watch them. It's great. It's great to watch kids outside. They play football. They're playing baseball with tennis balls, and gives me a little bit of hope. A little bit of hope. All right. Why don't we get on out of here? And tomorrow, I'm going to. Tomorrow is Thursday, right? Tomorrow I'll continue a little bit of this, and I want to kind of continue it with the QAnon phenomenon, and I'm going to get back into the QAnon chart part 2, and basically share with you how the two are not mutually exclusive. That QAnon, Israel, I do believe it is connected to Trump, and I also do believe it's a limited hang. Because this is what happens. They force you into one camp or the other. Oh, it's bullshit. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. Well, in some levels, it's not bullshit. It's actually real. And based on the chart, I can prove astrologically that it's real. But does that mean it is valid and true in leading you to a place where you can just simply check that box and have faith in POTUS? That's another question entirely. All right. With that, I leave you to your own thinking and feeling devices today. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to discern what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Thanks for listening. And you can go to my website, robertphoenix.com, if you like what I do. I don't have a Patreon. Don't do the Patreon. People who do Patreon, great. I know it works for some people. They're doing fine. They're actually supporting themselves. I don't do Patreon. I have a PayPal account on my website. If you feel like you'd like to contribute to these daily podcasts, and I know a lot of you do like them, feel free. Feel free to do that. I don't often, push that button, but I'll push that button today. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to discern what's possible.
You're listening to 15 Minutes of Flame with Robert Phoenix.